Okay, we're going to finish this chapter. Granamere just said, read. She wants to hear what Mr. Brown has to say. Page 69. So I read Mr. Brown's letter aloud to her. Now, Granamere knew a little bit about what had happened at Beecher Prep, but I don't think she knew the whole story. I mean, I think Mom and Dad told her the version of the story they told everyone else, with maybe a few more details. Granamere knew there were a couple of kids who had made my life miserable, for instance, but she didn't know the specifics. She knew I'd gotten punched in the mouth, but she didn't know why. If anything, Granamere probably assumed I had gotten bullied, and that's why I was leaving the school. So there were parts of Mr. Brown's email she really didn't understand. What does that mean? She said, squinting as she tried to read off my screen. Augie's physical appearance? Qu'est-ce que c'est? One of the kids that I didn't really like, Augie, he had like this awful facial deformity, I answered. It was really bad. He looked like a gargoyle. Julian, she said, that is not very nice. Sorry. And this boy, he was not sympathique? She asked innocently. He was not nice to you? He was a bully? I thought about that. No, he wasn't a bully. So, why did you not like him? I shrugged. I don't know. He just got on my nerves. What do you mean, you don't know? She answered quickly. Your parents told me you were leaving school because of some bullies, no? You got punched in the face, no? Well, yeah, I got punched but not by the deformed kid, by his friend. Ah, so his friend was the bully. No, not exactly, I said. I can't say they were bullies, Granamere. I mean, it wasn't like that. We just didn't get along, that's all. We hated each other. It's kind of hard to explain. You kind of had to be there. Here, let me show you what he looked like. Then maybe you'll understand a little better. I mean, not to sound mean, but it was really hard having to look at him every day. He gave me nightmares. I logged on to Facebook and found our class picture and zoomed in on Augie's face so she could see. She put her glasses on to look at it and spent a long time studying his face on the computer screen. I thought she would react the way Mom had reacted when she first saw the picture of Augie, but she didn't. She just nodded to herself, and then she closed the laptop. Pretty bad, huh? I said to her. She looked at me. Julian, she said, I think maybe your teacher is right. I think you were afraid of this boy. What? No way, I answered. I'm not afraid of Augie. I mean, I didn't like him. In fact, I kind of hated him, but not because I was afraid of him. Sometimes we hate the things we are afraid of, she said. I made a face like she was talking crazy. She took my hand. I know what it is like to be afraid, Julian, she said, holding her finger up to my face. There was a little boy that I was afraid of when I was a little girl. Let me guess, I answered, sounding bored. I bet he looked just like Augie. Granamere shook her head. No, his face was fine. So why were you afraid of him? I asked. I tried to make my voice sound as disinterested as possible, but Granamere ignored my bad attitude. She just sat back in her chair, her head slightly tilted, and I could tell by looking into her eyes that she had gone somewhere far away. Okay, page 72, Granamere's story. I was a very popular girl when I was young, Julian, said Granamere. I had many friends. I had pretty clothes. And, as you can see, I have always liked pretty clothes. She waved her hands down her sides to make sure I noticed her dress. She smiled. I was a frivolous girl, she continued, spoiled. When the Germans came to France, I hardly took any notice. I knew that some Jewish families in my village were moving away, but my family was so cosmopolitan. My parents were intellectuals, atheists. We didn't even go to synagogue. She paused here and asked me to bring her a wine glass, which I did. She served herself a full glass and, as she always did, offered me some too. And as I always did, I said, no, merci. Like I said, Mom would go ballistic if she knew the stuff Granamere did sometimes. There was a boy in my school called, well, they called him Torteroo, she continued. He was, how do you say the word, crippled? Is that how you say it? I don't think people use that word anymore, Granamere, I said. It's not exactly politically correct, if you know what I mean. She flicked her hand at me. Americans are always coming up with the new words we can't say anymore, she said. Also, well, Torteru's legs were deformed from the polio. He needed 2 canes to walk with, and his back was all twisted. I think that's why they called him Tortero, crab. He walked sideways like a crab. I know, it sounds very harsh. Children were meaner in those days. I thought about how I called August the freak behind his back, but at least I never called him that to his face. Granamere continued talking. I have to admit, at first I wasn't into her telling me one of her long stories, but I was getting into this one. Torto was a little thing, a skinny thing. None of us ever talked to him because he made us uncomfortable. He was so different. I never even looked at him. I was afraid of him. Afraid to look at him, to talk to him. Afraid he would accidentally touch me. It was easier to pretend he didn't exist. She took a long sip of her wine. One morning, a man came running into our school. I knew him. Everyone did. He was a maquis, a partisan. So do you know what that is? He was against the Germans. He rushed into the school and told the teachers that the Germans were coming to take all the Jewish children away. What? What is this? I could not believe what I was hearing. The teachers in the school went around to all the classes and gathered the Jewish children together. We were told to follow the maquis into the woods. We were going to hide. Hurry, hurry! I think there were maybe 10 of us in all. Hurry, hurry! Escape! Grandmother looked to me to make sure I was listening, which of course I was. It was snowing that morning and very cold, and all I could think of was, if I go into the woods, I will ruin my shoes. I was wearing these beautiful new red shoes that Papa had brought me. You see, as I said before, I was a frivolous girl, perhaps even a little stupid. But this is what I was thinking. I did not even stop to think, well, where is Mamam and Papa? If the Germans are coming for the Jewish children, have they come for the parents already? This did not occur to me at all. All I could think about were my beautiful shoes. So, instead of following the maquis into the woods, I snuck away from the group and went to hide inside the bell tower of the school. There was a tiny room up there full of crates and books, and there I hid. I remember thinking I would go home in the afternoon after the Germans came and tell Maman and Papa about it. This is how stupid I was, Julian. I nodded. I couldn't believe I had never heard the story before. And then the Germans came, she said. There was a narrow window in the tower, and I could see them perfectly. I watched them run into the woods after the children. It did not take them very long to find them. They all came back together, the Germans, the children, the maquis soldier. Grandmother paused and blinked a few times, and then she took a deep breath. They shot the maquis in front of all the children, she said quietly. He fell so softly, Julian, in the snow. The children cried. They cried as they were led away in a line. One of the teachers, Mademoiselle Petitjean, went with them, even though she was not Jewish. She said she would not leave her children. No one ever saw her again, poor thing. By now, Julian, I had awakened from my stupidity. I was not thinking of my red shoes anymore. I was thinking of my friends who had been taken away. I was thinking of my parents. I was waiting until it was nighttime so I could go home to them. But not all the Germans had left. Some had stayed behind, along with the French police. They were searching the school, and then I realized they were looking for me. Yes, for me, and for the 1 or 2 other Jewish children who had not gone into the woods. I realized then that my friend Rachel had not been among the Jewish children who were marched away, nor Jacob, a boy from another village who all the girls wanted to marry because he was so handsome. Where were they? They must have been hiding, just like I was. Then I heard creaking, Julian. Up the stairs. I heard footsteps up the stairs coming closer to me. I was so scared. I tried to make myself as small as possible behind the crate and hid my head beneath a blanket. Here Grandmother covered her head with her arms, as if to show me how she was hiding. And then I heard someone whisper my name. She said, it was not a man's voice, it was a child's voice. Sarah, the voice whispered again. I peeked out from the blanket. Torto, I answered, astonished. I was so surprised because in all the years I had known him, I don't think I had ever said a word to him, nor him to me. And yet, there he was, calling my name. They will find you here, he said. Follow me. And I did follow him, for by now I was terrified. He led me down a hallway into the chapel of the school, which I had never really been to before. We went to the back of the chapel where there was a crypt. All this was new to me, Julian, and we crawled through the crypt so the Germans would not see us through the windows, because they were looking for us still. I heard when they found Rachel. I heard her screaming in the courtyard as they took her away. Poor Rachel. Tortoro took me down to the basement beneath the crypt. There must have been 100 steps at least. These were not easy for Tortoro, as you can imagine, with his terrible limp and his 2 canes. But he hopped down the steps 2 at a time, looking behind him to make sure I was following. Finally, we arrived at a passage. It was so narrow we had to walk sideways to get through. And then we were in the sewers, Julian. Can you imagine? I knew instantly because of the smell, of course. We were knee-deep in refuse. You can imagine the smell. So much for my red shoes. We walked all night. I was so cold, Julian. Tortoro was such a kind boy, though. He gave me his coat to wear. It was, to this day, the most noble act anyone has ever done for me. He was freezing, too, but he gave me his coat. I was so ashamed for the way I had treated him. Oh, Julian, I was so ashamed. She covered her mouth with her fingers and swallowed. Then she finished the glass of wine and poured herself another. The sewers led to Dannersville, a small village about 15 kilometers away from Albertville. Maman and Papa had always avoided this town because of the smell. The sewers from Paris drained into the farmland there. We wouldn't even eat apples grown in Dannersville, but it's where Tortoro lived. He took me to his house, and we cleaned ourselves by the well, and then Tortoro brought me to his barn behind his house. He wrapped me up in a horse blanket and told me to wait. He was going to get his parents. No, I pleaded. Please don't tell them. I was so frightened. I wondered if, when they saw me, they would call the Germans. I had never met them before. But Totoro left, and a few minutes later he returned with his parents. They looked at me. I must have seemed quite pathetic there, all wet and shivering. The mother, Vivian, put her arms around me to comfort me. Oh, Julian, that hug was the warmest hug I've ever felt. I cried so hard in this woman's arms because I knew I would never cry in my own maman's arms again. I just knew it in my heart, Julian, and I was right. They had taken Maman away that same day, along with all the other Jews in the city. My father, who had been at work, had been warned that the Germans were coming and managed to escape. He was smuggled to Switzerland, but it was too late for Maman. She was deported that day to Auschwitz. I never saw her again, my beautiful Maman. She took a deep breath here and shook her head. All right, I gotta stop here. I'm gonna run out of time. Stay tuned for next week when we probably will finish the Julian chapter.